You're listening to the Home and Outdoor Living podcast. I'm your host, Michael Garcia, and my goal is to educate you on various home living topics and provide you with actionable steps to take in your projects. If you're a homeowner, you're in the right place. On to today's episode. Welcome back, guys. Today we are here with Matt Hiner. He is a landscape designer out in Colorado, and you build some magnificent projects. Matt, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Michael.
Awesome. So I've known you for quite some time, and today I was hoping that we could talk about the landscape design process, the architecture process. And I think one of the most common questions that we get asked is like, what's the budget going to be, right? And often the premise of the conversation turns into, are we going to design to a budget, or are we going to budget to a design? Would you feel like that's a fair step number one in the process almost that we're getting asked?
I think it's definitely a conversation that should be had earlier on than before you get too far down the line. I think one of the biggest unknowns when you start working with a landscape contractor is how much is this going to cost? And, having those two theories is certainly a really good way to approach. And I think everybody's different. And so if you can pick one of those, that way you're going to be able to get what you want and also spend what you want at the end of the day.
Right. So when we say like design to a budget, what do you feel like that means?
Design to a budget would mean, if I'm a homeowner and I've got, X amount that I want to spend, I would say, all right, I want my budget to be $40,000. Let's say I've got not a penny more than that. And then I'm going to hire a designer and say, this is my budget. Please design me something within a $40,000 box, basically. And so you might not necessarily get exactly and everything that you're looking for or asking for, but you're going to get a design back that's going to match your budget and ultimately, be something that's realistic and affordable to you.
Right. So basically, homeowner or business owner calls. They say, "I got $40,000. What's the best design that you can give me? In that budget, right?"
Right.
And so when we say budget to design, what would you say like that means?
Budget to design might more so be like, all right, I've got, this is my wish list. I'd like to see this, and this all incorporated. It's kind of more like a top-down approach, meaning, let's put everything that I want into the melting pot. Let the designer do what they do best, which is create an ultimate space of everything that you'd like. And then you can price it out and you can budget to that design, meaning you can influence what that's going to cost based on material selection or density of plants, size of plants. I mean, we can put a tree in the design and that tree can be, it can be 6 foot tall or it could be 12 foot tall. Each one comes with a different price tag, but that tree is going to ultimately have a significant impact on the price of the project.
Right. I would say also too, a significant impact on the project itself, right? The final product, right? Because if you're going to put in, let's talk about trees for a second, where, the smallest tree you're probably going to put in is maybe 8 to 12 feet tall, something like that, right? On average. Maybe if it's a weeping tree, it's going to be smaller, but let's just say like, a taller tree. That's going to look different in the landscape than if you say had installed a huge spaded tree, that comes in with a big spade truck and drops it in the ground, right? Like the final impact when the job's done is going to look different.
Exactly. You're really buying time at that end, but like if you're looking at the design, the tree is still the same. It's still this one tree in one location. But like you said, yeah, you can get a really big spaded tree, or you can go to the nursery and pick out the smallest tree. But when the project's done, you're going to have a completely different look for a while, and you might just have to wait and be patient for those trees to grow.
Right, yeah, because when we're designing, it's right tree, right place, but it's we're putting in the design the mature size of the plant, not the initial install size, right? Because we don't want it to overgrow that area in the future. So I think that's important to note that when you're having a designer, that they're going to do that, and you should probably ask them that question, right? Because I guess in today's world, you never know what you're going to get, so you should probably make sure that's clear. And for those who don't know, I'm just going to clarify real quick. Like a spaded tree, basically, a spade is a tool, and it's like a huge clamp, basically, right? That would drop a humongous tree in the ground, right? Grabs the root zone and drops it in the hole, or even creates a hole for it to pull a tree out of the ground. So good. So basically, right, a good place to start the conversation is, okay, are we going to design to a budget, or are we going to budget to a design? How would someone who wants to embark on this process figure out which category they're in?
I mean, I find ultimately, with most of the homeowners that I'm working with, I think they have a general idea of what they want to spend. But as they continue to go down through the process, it always ends up being more than what they initially thought it was going to be, because it is a much more expensive process than I think most of us realize. And I think it's only natural for us as human beings to want what we want. And after we've worked with a talented designer, I mean, their job is to bring out the maximum potential of what they're wanting, and show you and build you and create you a lifestyle that is going to make you, you know, be unique and be beautiful. And so it's only natural to want to find a way to create that space for yourself. And so, what might start out as a $40,000 budget might creep up higher and higher before you know it, because you do get into the details. Um, you know, there's different finishes. You can pour just a regular gray concrete pad and slab that might not have the longevity or the finish that you're looking for, or you can import, you know, Italian stone from, and really increase the price. That square footage is the square footage.
Right,
So,
right.
it's about working with that designer to really dial in that look that you're going for, and kind of just work your way up and see what that space is going to look like when you're all said and done.
Yeah, so it seems like it might be a challenge actually to figure out which category you're in, right? So it might come back to having a base knowledge of your finances, right? Like what your absolute top line is, and making sure that you understand that from the get go before kind of doing the design process, or what could be referred as a shopping process, right? Because I guess the best example is, I could equate this to buying a vehicle, right? You have an idea of what you want, especially an experienced driver. Typically, they've already gone through the use of their first car in their life, so they understand how they want to drive, how they want it to feel, and what amenities they feel like they missed out of their first car. So by the time they get their second car or later in life, they usually have an idea, right? So the idea might be, I want a sedan. They're already thinking of a couple brands that they would want, and they go out and look for it. But by the time you get into the base model and they start showing you all the upgrades, the warranty care, the nav upgrade, the speaker upgrades, the seat upgrades, the trim packages, all that. Next thing you know, you could easily be spending 50 to 100% more on that purchase. So I often equate the design process to that, but knowing where you are financially would, I guess, cap you, right? Like, okay, I can never go above this, right? And so that might mean that someone would have to make some compromises from the get go. Would you agree?
I agree. Yep. I think, if you just pile in everything that you want and just kind of build the dream, and then for me personally, I find it's easier, just let's start at the top, and then let's take away the things you know, that aren't realistic, or find a better alternative. Like, you can put a barbecue in there, but have that honest conversation. Are you an avid barbecuer, and you're going to be barbecuing 5 times a week, or is it just an occasional thing? Maybe you don't need that $5,000 luxury grill, and $1,500 starter grill will suffice.
Right.
It's about having open. It, you, I think a lot of it too is trusting your designer too. Like and being willing to be a little vulnerable with them, so that way, it starts with doing your homework first and foremost to make sure that you're working with a reputable company that's going to have your best interests in mind and at heart. And that way they can really coach you on what your options are and how you can really best build that space to the maximum potential without sacrificing any of the things that may or may not matter when it's all said and done.
Right, because I think we should note the design process can be an expensive endeavor on its own, right? If you're not quite clear on the intentions going from the outset, which an experienced designer or planner would be able to at least wrap that around, but say you didn't, you know, designs, whether it's a 2D package or a 3D package, plus all the work that goes into it. I mean, you're talking starting at least $1,000. And in some projects, depending if there's architecture involved, it could be up to 5,000 very easily. And very large scale redevelopment projects, of course, would be more than that, right?
Yes. I think it's important to point out that, when you're working with the designer, there's different levels of design. At our company, we start with kind of the conceptual phase. And in the conceptual phase, it really is just kind of getting all those big ideas organized on paper, and I'm going to start with kind of like a rough sketch, basically, that I'm going to do on my iPad. And that's going to put the orientation of certain things. We're going to have the trees in there. We're going to have the patio. We're going to put that fire pit in that spot, and we're going to make sure that the flow of the space is going to match. But it's going to be rough ideas. There's a lot of things that are going to go into a much more refined design. Like, we have to take grade considerations. We have to take in sun exposure, wind exposure, all these different things and elements that are going to come into a very well thought out design. And you're not going to get that on the first pass. And not to mention, those first initial ideas that are presented have infinite amount of options when it comes to finishes and that kind of stuff, especially when you start getting into the hardscapes and stone and the plants and those kind of things. It can be a multi-step process to ultimately get that design that's going to be built. We've gone through, as little as, 1 to 2 revisions to as much as like 10 revisions with clients in the past, just because, sometimes it takes a little bit longer to really dial in, what you want and that you're still spending what's comfortable to you, because that first level of design isn't going to be enough to truly build something, because you might have to come through, price some of that stuff out, and then you're going to have a little bit more better information on, what direction you want to take next.
Right. Yeah, no, that's a key point. I've had designs where we got it right on the first try. Often they were smaller projects. And then, we've had projects where we've had to go back to the drawing board several times to get it perfect. Not because it was anybody's fault, but because the conversation evolves, right? And so sometimes, and the design has to change with it. And so I think that's a good way of bracketing, like, okay, are we designing to a budget or budgeting to a design? And having that set out in the beginning. But even inside a design, there's multiple features that we can install. And you alluded to it, is it poured concrete? Is it pavers? Is it natural stone? That have multiple options and multiple price implications within it, right? I think a good one was the outdoor kitchen, right? Because you can have just a standalone barbecue grill just sitting somewhere in the corner. And you can get a cart model for $500 to $1,000 for a pretty good one. But the moment we go into the outdoor kitchen class, where we're either building a pre-made standalone kitchen or a stoned-in built-in one, and then automatically the grill goes to $1,500, and it can go up to $5,000. But then in addition, there's now you got countertops, and now you've got, are we going to have a roof over it? Is it going to be under a pavilion, or is it going to have an arbor on it, right? So I want to go into that so that people understand that even within each feature that there can be massive implications, right? So I kind of explained one. What's another one that comes to mind that could have big differences?
I would say water features is
Okay.
an easy one that could have big differences too. Um, you know, we can start with the sound of water, and that sound of water can come in the form of a recirculating fountain. You can build streams or you can build ponds, and then even if you dive into the differences of each, each of those has many different layers. At the end of the day, you're still getting the sound of water, but let's take a like a pondless water feature, for example. I can build you a 3-foot stream, or I can build you a 50-foot stream. Obviously, the impact and the visual is going to be different, but even within those same sizes, let's say we have a 10-foot stream, I can build it with little rock, or I can build it with big boulders. Each of those comes with a different price tag as well. So, there's a lot of moving parts, and I think it all depends on, you know, what you want your outdoor experience to be when you're all said and done. I would recommend, like, start with some pictures of, inspiration pictures, and really hone in what's important to you before embarking on hiring a designer. And, I know it helps me as a designer. I don't know about you, but like if you've got some sort of a Pinterest board or some saved photos from Instagram, it's just something as visual. A picture can say 1,000 words. So if you can say, like, I saw this backyard, and show me and say, this is what I want, I'd be like, all right, I can take that and I can run with it and I can create you that. But then I can also say, if that's what you want, something like that's going to cost you between $60,000 and $80,000. Is that feasible? Is that realistic? And then you can, as long as you are comfortable with giving a direct answer, you're going to get the best out of your designer. So if you can say, yeah, that's good, now we can budget to that, we can design the dream, and then we have a little bit of flexibility of either designing to that budget or budgeting that design within that process.
Right. Yeah, that's a key one is the inspiration photos, right? And the water features are a really good example of the differences. And just one difference alone was the size of rock, because whether it's fountains or streams, ponds, or even recreational ponds, which you could technically swim in, I guess, the size of rock could just double the project by itself, just with the size of rock. Not even talking about the size, like the scale of the feature. Just same size, you go from small rock to big rock, could double the budget. Yeah. And I guess I was just thinking in almost every category, just with one simple change, you could basically double the budget, right? I think the grill was a key indicator.
Oh yeah, I think in one particular area, you can very easily double, triple, quadruple the price. Uh, let's take a patio, for example. We can pour a blank slab of concrete for $2,000, or we can do some high-end natural stone, and it could be $12,000. It's a huge swing when it comes to selecting the different types of materials. And it's, if you're working with a good designer, the idea is that they're only going to present you some site appropriate, unless you've got something very specific that you want. They should be, if you're working with someone reputable, they should be presenting something that's going to be site appropriate and complement your home. And so that way you're not building yourself out of the market or certain things like that.
Yeah, I'd say designing to the property is important, right? Thinking back to a conversation I had yesterday, reviewing a design, of course, the budget almost doubled, by the time it was done, but it was exactly what they asked for. And that was one of the questions, was to help justify the purchase or know that they're not wrong, was, well, how much value is this going to add to my home? Which I don't think anybody knows. But what I can say is that as long as it's not luxurious over the top based on the property, no one's going to not buy it from you, right? Because it's only worth what someone's going to pay you for when you sell. But if you're not selling anytime soon, it's not really that much of a concern, because it's more of a lifestyle thing. And I would say, the last bit, the only thing I would say is, like, if someone wants to make money on something, there's definitely better ways to do it than to do this elaborate landscape. Um, how do you feel about that?
I, that's usually one of the first questions I ask when they start bringing a lot of those things, because I think candidly, you're going to be lucky to get your money back out of outdoor living and landscaping. Um, so one of my first question is, how long do you intend on being in your home? You know, if they're a military family and they're going to be here just a couple of years, I'm going to say, all right, well, I think we should probably stick a little bit more budget friendly and just get this. Um, so because you're not gonna be here long enough to really get that return on lifestyle investment, because really that's what you're investing in. You're investing in the quality of life at home when you're embarking on a larger scale project of outdoor living. Uh, because I've found firsthand that I have gotten my money back out of landscaping that I've done in previous homes, and I've also found that I got top dollar for my home because I had the nice outdoor living and landscaping. Um, uh, we even got over asking price. However, you know, if you are in a neighborhood and you're competing against homes in a similar price point, and you've got the same person looking at two, three different homes, and they come to your backyard and they see this, retreat style backyard that's been built, and you might be priced a little bit more, but in the neighborhood that they want. Um, and they go to the next one and they just see poor landscaping or maybe a lot of maintenance or something that's even been neglected. Who knows? They're going to want to choose that 10 out of 10 times,
Mm-hmm.
because they're going to get the instant gratification of that lifestyle that they're going to be buying when you go to sell your home, and you're going to be much more competitive because it's going to show a lot better.
Right, right. Yeah, a good example that I like to use sometimes if we really want to measure some kind of ROI or cost is if someone says they're going to be in the home for 10 years and they're considering $100,000 project that isn't over the top compared to the neighborhood that's there, the home value is pretty strong. 100,000 over 10 years is $10,000 a year, right? So depending on how many family members, that could be their travel budget, right? Well, instead of traveling extravagantly, maybe they're going to do smaller
They're on
trips.
vacation every single day.
Exactly. They're going to be able to walk out the back door, or walk, up the driveway from work, and be living their experience daily. And that's one of the statements that I get the most is I visit our clients a year later for a warranty visit. And the very first thing they say oftentimes is, I've never spent so much time in my yard in 1 year compared to the whole time that I've lived here. Right. And it's true because, you wouldn't do all this stuff and not go out there, but it is pulling you out there. It's a lifestyle. So yeah, I think that's a great point to note. So I guess to give some condensed takeaways for those listening, I think we talked on a few things. I think the first thing that might be is, okay, come to the conversation table with inspiration photos, right? Would you agree?
I think that's very helpful. That's part of your homework of just kind of knowing exactly what you want. I mean, I was meeting with somebody last week. She's like, I just want a backyard oasis. And I said, all right, what does that mean to you? And I tried to dig a little deeper. And so ultimately what we did is we just went down, sat at the kitchen table, brought up my Instagram and started looking at pictures. And she was able to instantly point, yeah, that's what I like. That's what I like. And so the pictures just really help communicate on a much higher level with your designer.
Yeah. Yeah. I'd say for that point, if that's what you needed to kind of wrap your mind around, because unless you're a designer, these things don't come naturally to you, right? Until you see it, you don't really believe it. Like you don't even know it exists. So if finding your own inspiration photos, whether through Instagram or Pinterest or whatever other platform, is difficult for you, then just spend a little bit more time with your designer, knowing that it is going to cost you a little bit more. But in the grand scheme of things, if that's going to take you from A to B with the most ease and less hassle for you, I would recommend it, right? Because the last thing that we want as designers or contractors is to have our client or prospective client stressed out, because it is already stressful enough, especially dealing with abstract issues. What would you say would be the next step after, okay, you find pictures that you like? What would be the next step?
I would say, look at your own finances, and establish your own budget before going with them, because um, you know chances are it's probably going to be north. It always is, of what you initially set it out to be. Uh, but at least have some sort of a reasonable budget pre-established, so that way you can get the conversation moving forward. And don't be afraid to ask questions of how much, like, big picture costs, like ballpark even of what things cost, just to make sure that the project that you want is even attainable and realistic for you and your budget and your home.
Yeah, that's a great point. I've found that some people do that and some people don't. But I've always found in both cases where until we have that conversation, the conversation doesn't really go anywhere. It often stays in circles because we talk about everything under the sun except the budget part. And until we talk about that, we can't actually really do anything, especially if there's no inspiration photos to go off of. So that's a fantastic point. And I guess after you figure the budget part out, and now I'd say the next step is probably to do some research and start reaching out to reputable designers or contractors that you feel like you want to work with, and then bring them to the table with your inspiration photos and your budget to see if there's a good fit to move forward.
Yep, I think it's important to really click with your designer. We all do business with people that we know, like, and trust. So find that person that you feel comfortable with, that you feel that listens to you, and take a peek at their portfolio, because really, the pictures that you see that they've completed are going to set the stage and the expectations of what you should be able to expect and see at your own home.
Yep, I couldn't agree more. Is there anything else that you would add to that?
Yeah, don't be afraid of that budget question. I know, for me, one of my greatest strengths is my creativity, but at the same time, I tell people when I meet with them, it can be my greatest strength, but it can also be my biggest Achilles heel or weakness, because I don't want to design myself out of a job. And so, I don't want to, like, crush your dreams by bringing something that's way over the top that's not going to be realistic. So um, don't be afraid of that budget question. I think like, the biggest fear is, well, if I tell them my budget, they're going to maximize their profits and they're going to just take me to the cleaners. Well, not if you are picking the right customer, or but the right contractor or designer, and just checking their reputation and being comfortable with them. Uh, you're gonna get something that's more than fair. Don't be afraid to even ask to see some of their completed projects, or talk to some of their existing clients if you're trying to pick somebody off the street. So that's always a good way to feel out who you're working with.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'd say any designer or contractor is going to have either a list of people that you can call, or a really good online reviews, or a curated list of surveys or feedback that they've received over the years that you can see. They might have video testimonials. If they don't have any of those, I'm going to be pretty wary, because you're not going to be able to have any sense of validation on anything they say, really. Unless they have a pretty deep portfolio with some of that stuff in it. But oftentimes you either see that stuff or you don't. So I'd be careful with that. And yeah, I think that's good, right? So find your inspiration photos, right? Often people go on vacation, they see something that they like, or hop on a Pinterest. Instagram is a good one. The House Network is also another good one. Sit down and have a candid conversation amongst your family or amongst your household about the budget. Consider your home value into play there, because that will have some kind of impact on the top line what you should spend, and then to start interviewing designers and figure out who's going to be a good fit. And have we missed anything, Matt?
No, I think we've covered it all.
Awesome. Well, where can people find out more from you? Because you also do global designs. Where can they get more information on you?
The best place to find me is on Instagram. It's at the Yardist. It's the_Yardist. So the combination of yard artist. So.
Yep. Awesome. And so Matt runs Hiner Landscaping out in the Springs of Colorado. And check their stuff out. They do some really good stuff. Any last words, Matt?
I appreciate you having me on today, Michael. Appreciate your time and the opportunity to speak with you today.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. And I imagine that people got a wealth of knowledge from you today. And thanks for tuning in, guys. We will see you next time. Thanks for listening. If you found value in this episode, you can support us for free by subscribing, rating, and reviewing this podcast. See you next time.